over-imitation in the laboratory. Crucial to making cultural adaptations like manioc, corn, or nardoo processing work is not only faithfully copying all the steps, but also, sometimes, actually avoiding putting much emphasis on causal understandings that one might build on the fly, on one's own. As shown, dropping seemingly unnecessary steps from one's cultural repertoire can result in neurological disorders, paralysis, pellagra, reduced hunting success, pregnancy problems, and death. In a species with cumulative cultural evolution, but only in such a species, faith in one's cultural inheritance often favors greater survival and reproduction. Dovetailing with the field observations, experimental work with children and adults on the fidelity of cultural learning allows us to put a microscope on the cultural transmission process. Recently, psychologists have studied the when and why of people's willingness to copy the seemingly irrelevant steps used by another to get to a reward. In a typical experiment, a participant sees a model engage in a multi-step procedure that involves using simple tools to push, pull, lift, poke, and tap an artificial fruit, often a large box with doors and holes. The procedure usually results in obtaining some desirable outcome, such as a toy or snack. Some of the steps in the procedure are not apparently required to achieve the goal of getting the reward. Sometimes people even copy steps with no evident material physical connection to the outcome. Notorious for inappropriately naming of behavioral patterns, psychologists have labeled this not particularly shocking phenomenon over-imitation. Let's examine a specific experiment that has been tested and replicated with children, adults, and chimpanzees. In the experiment, participants first observe a model engage in a series of steps using a slender rod to access a reward in an artificial fruit. The fruit is a large opaque box with 2 entry points. The first entry point is sealed by bolts, which can be A, pushed, or B, dragged out of the way, using the rod, to provide access to the tube. This tube, however, merely dead ends. It's a decoy and is irrelevant to obtaining the reward. The second entry point is concealed by a doorway, which can be A, slid, or B, lifted. The rod, which has a Velcro tip, can then be maneuvered down the tube to obtain the reward, a sticker for the kids or food for the chimps. The robust results from these kinds of experiments are that children and adults are rather inclined to copy whatever the model does to obtain the reward. People even copy the irrelevant actions when they are alone, after they think the experiment is over, and when they've been told explicitly not to copy any irrelevant actions. However, as we'd expect from Chapter 4, people are more likely to copy irrelevant actions when the model is older and higher in prestige. This is also not merely some tendency of little children. Assuming the problem is sufficiently opaque, the magnitude of over-imitation increases with age. This also isn't just educated Western peoples. Research in the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa, whose populations lived as foragers until recent decades, show them to be at least as inclined to high-fidelity cultural transmission as Western undergraduates. As you may anticipate, the chimpanzees outperformed their big-headed cousins once again. In this work, the comparative psychologists Vicky Horner and Andy Whiten used the same opaque artificial fruit used, and also a clear version of the fruit, in which one could readily see that the top slot was not connected to the area with the reward. When the causality was more transparent, with the clear box, the chimpanzees immediately dropped all irrelevant actions, whereas the 3 to 4-year-old Scottish kids copied the irrelevant actions as much as with the opaque fruit. Chimpanzees did learn some stuff by watching the model work on the fruit. It helped them assess the affordances of the apparatus. They learned how different parts of the fruit could move. But once they had visual evidence that these actions would not do anything, they dropped them. Though chimps clearly have some culture, they aren't a cultural species. Nevertheless, there's much more to over-imitation than this. As we discussed in Chapter 2, humans possess a certain degree of low-level automatic mimicry. This is one reason why the chimpanzees can zoom in on the optimal matching pennies solution, but we can't. Second, as we'll discuss in Chapter 8, humans have also evolved to use mimicry to build social relationships and to cue status differences. So we also mimic others to say, "Hey, I want to relate to you. You're swell." Finally, beginning in Chapter 9, we'll discuss how cultural evolution generates social norms that, if violated, can result in a bad reputation or other punishment. So sometimes people may also over-imitate to avoid getting a bad reputation as a deviant. Culture-gene coevolution generates many reasons why our species is inclined to copy all the steps or closely follow the local protocols. Our reliance on cultural transmission, however, goes much deeper. In addition to acquiring practices and beliefs, which may violate our intuitive understandings, we can also acquire tastes, preferences, and motivations. These too can be acquired in the face of our instinctual or innate inclinations. That acquisition does not mean we don't have instincts or innate inclinations, but merely that natural selection has endowed our cultural learning systems with the ability to, under the right conditions, overwrite or work around them. Overcoming instinct. Why chili peppers taste good. Why do we use spices in our foods? In thinking about this question, keep in mind that 1. Other animals don't spice their foods. 2. Most spices contribute little or no nutrition to our diets. And 3. The active ingredients in many spices are actually aversive chemicals that evolved to keep insects, fungi, bacteria, mammals, and other unwanted critters away from the plants that produce them. Several lines of evidence indicate that spicing may represent a class of cultural adaptations to the problem of food-borne pathogens. Many spices are antimicrobials that can kill pathogens in foods. Globally, the common spices are onions, pepper, garlic, cilantro, chili peppers, capsicum, and bay leaves. Here's the idea. The use of many spices represents a cultural adaptation to the problem of pathogens in food, especially in meat. This challenge would have been most important before refrigerators came on the scene. To examine this, 2 biologists, Jennifer Billing and Paul Sherman, collected 4,578 recipes from traditional cookbooks from populations around the world. They found 3 distinct patterns. 1. Spices are, in fact, antimicrobial. The most common spices in the world are also the most effective against bacteria. Some spices are also fungicides. Combinations of spices have synergistic effects, which may explain why ingredients like chili powder, a mix of red pepper, onion, paprika, garlic, cumin, and oregano, are so important, and ingredients like lemon and lime, which are not on their own potent antimicrobials, appear to catalyze the bacteria-killing effect of other spices. 2. People in hotter climates use more spices, and more of the most effective bacteria killers. In India and Indonesia, for example, most recipes used many antimicrobial spices, including onions, garlic, capsicum, and coriander. Meanwhile, in Norway, recipes use some black pepper and occasionally a bit of parsley or lemon, but that's about it. 3. Recipes appear to use spices in ways that increase their effectiveness. Some spices, like onions and garlic, whose killing power is resistant to heating, are deployed in the cooking process. Other spices, like cilantro, whose antimicrobial properties might be damaged by heating, are added fresh in recipes. Thus, many recipes and preferences appear to be cultural adaptations that are suited to local environments and that operate in subtle and nuanced ways not understood by those of us who love spicy foods. Billing and Sherman speculated that these evolved culturally as healthier, more fertile, and more successful families were preferentially imitated by less successful ones. This is quite plausible, given what we know about our species-evolved psychology for cultural learning, including specifically cultural learning about foods and plants. Among spices, chili peppers are an ideal case. Chili peppers were the primary spice of New World cuisines prior to the arrival of Europeans, and are now routinely consumed by about a quarter of all adults globally. Chili peppers have evolved chemical defenses based on capsaicin that make them aversive to mammals and rodents, but desirable to birds. In mammals, capsicum directly activates a pain channel, TRPV1, which creates a burning sensation in response to various specific stimuli, including acid, high temperatures, and allyl isothiocyanate, which is found in mustard and wasabi. These chemical weapons aid chili pepper plants in their survival and reproduction, because birds provide a better dispersal system for the plant's seeds than other options, like mammals. Consequently, chilies are innately aversive to non-human primates, babies, and many human adults. Capsaicin is so innately repellent that nursing mothers are advised to avoid chili peppers lest their infants reject their breast milk, and in some societies, capsicum is even put on a mother's breasts to initiate weaning. Yet adults who live in hot climates regularly incorporate chilies into their recipes, and those who grow up among people who enjoy eating chili peppers not only eat chilies, but love eating them. How do we come to like the experience of burning and sweating, the activation of pain channel TRPV1? Research by the psychologist Paul Rozin shows that people come to enjoy the experience of eating chili peppers mostly by reinterpreting the pain signals caused by capsicum as pleasure or excitement. Based on work in the highlands of Mexico, children acquire this preference gradually, without being pressured or compelled. They want to learn to like chili peppers, to be like those they admire. This fits with what we've already seen. Children readily acquire food preferences from older peers. In Chapter 14, I will further examine how cultural learning can alter our body's physiological response to pain, and specifically to electric shocks. The bottom line is that culture can overpower our innate mammalian aversions when necessary and without us knowing it. As a product of this long-running duet between cumulative cultural evolution and genes, our brains have genetically adapted to a world in which information crucial to our survival was embedded implicitly in a vast body of knowledge that we inherit culturally from previous generations. This information comes buried in daily cooking routines, manioc, taboos, divination rituals, local tastes, chili peppers, mental models, and tool manufacturing scripts, arrow shafts. These practices and beliefs are often, implicitly, much smarter than we are, as neither individuals nor groups could figure them out in one lifetime. As you'll discover in later chapters, this is also true of some institutions, religious beliefs, rituals, and medical practices. For these evolutionary reasons, learners first decide if they will turn on their causal model builders at all, and if so, they have to carefully assess how much mental effort to put into them. And if cultural transmission supplies a pre-built mental model for how things work, learners readily acquire and adhere to those. Of course, people can, and do, attempt to break down complex procedures and protocols in order to understand the causal links between them and to engineer better versions. They also alter practices through experimentation, errors in learning, and idiosyncratic actions. Nevertheless, as a cultural species, we have an instinct to faithfully copy complex procedures, practices, beliefs, and motivations, including steps that may appear causally irrelevant, because cultural evolution has proved itself capable of constructing intricate and subtle cultural packages that are far better than we could individually construct in one lifetime. Often, people don't even know what their practices are actually doing, or that they are doing anything. Spicy food lovers in hot climates don't know that using recipes involving garlic and chili peppers protect their families from meat-borne pathogens. They just culturally inherited the tastes and the recipes and implicitly had faith in the wisdom accumulated by earlier generations. Finally, we humans do, of course, construct causal models of how the world works. However, what's often missed is that the construction of these models has long been sparked and fostered by the existence of complex, culturally evolved products. When people have accurately speculated on why they do something, this realization often occurs after the fact. Why do we always do it this way? There must be a reason. Maybe it's because... However, just because some people have speculated accurately as why they themselves, or their groups, do something in a particular way, does not mean that this is the reason why they do it. An enormous amount of scientific causal understanding, for example, has developed in trying to explain existing technologies, like the steam engine, hot air balloon, or airplane. The device or technology pre-existed the development of any causal understanding, but by existing, such cultural products opened a window on the world that facilitated the development of an improved causal understanding. That is, for much of human history until recently, cumulative cultural evolution drove the emergence of deeper causal understandings much more than causal understanding drove cultural evolution. This historical observation is consistent with experimental studies in young children. Research by the developmental psychologists Andrew Meltzoff, Alison Gopnik, and Anna Weissmeyer suggest that it's exposure to people using artifacts and trying to do things that most effectively sparks the causal inference machinery in our minds. Toddlers, for example, will more accurately infer the causal connection between a particular means and a particular end when they observe a person using an artifact than when they observe exactly the same naturally occurring physical movements and environmental correlations. That is, children switch their causal inference machinery on in the presence of people actually operating cultural artifacts. The causal models they build help learners better operate the artifact, or engage in the practice, in culturally prescribed ways. More on this later. Move over, natural selection. Famous evolutionary psychologists, from Steve Pinker to David Buss, are fond of claiming that natural selection is the only process capable of creating complex adaptations that are functionally well designed to meet environmental challenges or the demands of organisms' lives. They are impressed by the fact that products of natural selection, like eyes, wings, hearts, spiderwebs, nests, and polar bear snow caves, seem well suited or fit to the problems they solve. Save for certain telltale imperfections, these adaptations look well designed, even engineered. Eyes seem crafted for seeing, and wings for flying. Yet there's no engineer or designer, and no agents had intentions to create them or a mental model of how they work. I largely agree with this view, and certainly share their sense of awe at the stunning power of natural selection. However, I part ways with them on the word only. At least since the rise of cumulative cultural evolution, natural selection has lost its status as the only dumb process capable of creating complex adaptations well fit to local circumstances. As this chapter aimed to show, cultural evolution, through the selective attention and learning processes discussed in chapters 4 and 5, as well as others I've not mentioned, is fully capable of generating these complex adaptive products, which no one designed or had a causal mental model of before they emerged. To see this, let's compare two types of houses, two artifacts, one built by natural selection and one built by cumulative cultural evolution. In Africa, male village weaver birds construct strong, kidney-shaped nests with downward-facing tubular entrances that effectively protect 2 to 3 eggs from larger predators. Each species of weaver uses a stereotyped set of techniques to build the house in the same step-by-step pattern. Weavers first create an attachment and then construct a ring, roof, egg chamber, antechamber, and entryway. Weaving, in different parts of the house, involves one of 3 knots: overhand, half-hitch, and slip knot, and 3 different weave patterns. To build the house, weavers must locate and harvest particularly stout strips from tall grasses or palm fronds. The shape of the interior, combined with the downward-facing entry tunnel, means that predators will have a hard time getting at the eggs. The thickness and layered construction of the woven floor means that the eggs can even survive a fall should the nest be knocked off its branch. None of these techniques or layouts are learned from other birds. Weavers either just know them innately or are geared to reliably figure them out on the fly, on their own. Natural selection has constructed many such complex artifacts, and invertebrates such as termites, wasps, and spiders make many such beautiful structures without any mental model of their final form. Inuit snow houses are also a complex adaptation for living in many parts of the Arctic. Architecturally, these snow houses are unique in that they are constructed from snow blocks cut from drifts created during a single snowfall to form an aerodynamic dome shape that can stand against strong Arctic winds. Properly constructed, with blocks cut to fit, this dome is strong enough for a person to stand on without danger of collapse. Heated by small soapstone lamps that are fueled with rendered fat from marine mammals, the insulating properties of snow mean that inside temperatures are 10 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. This internal warmth slightly melts the snow, thereby allowing the walls and ceiling to freeze together even more solidly. Properly oriented, the long tunnel entrance not only blocks the wind, but also uses pressure differences to create a heat trap. Windows, created from translucent membranes cut from seal guts or sheets of ice, provide light inside, and small holes maintain air circulation. Like village weaver nests, Inuit snow houses look designed and are clearly functionally well fit to life in the Arctic. In fact, they appear to call for a team of engineers with knowledge of aerodynamics, thermodynamics, material science, and structural mechanics. Not surprisingly, facing the real threat of freezing to death in their tents, Franklin's men didn't figure out how to make snow houses. No single individual or even a group of 100 highly motivated men, in this case, could figure this out. It's a product of cumulative cultural evolution and contains features that many or most Inuit builders just learn as, "That's the way you do it," without any big causal model. Of course, there's little doubt that bits and pieces of causal models were culturally transmitted along with the procedures, rules, and protocols, since partial or mini models help builders make sure the parts are working and to adapt to changing or unusual circumstances. However, most of these causal mini models are themselves transmitted culturally as part of the overall package, not built on the fly by individuals. Recognizing the power of cultural evolution to produce such adaptive complexity has serious implications for studying humans. It means that when we observe something functionally well suited to address an adaptive challenge outside of conscious awareness, whether it be a snow house or complex cognitive ability, like subtracting 16 from 17, we can't assume that the complexity comes from either natural selection acting on genes or intentional construction. It might be a product of cumulative cultural evolution. Overall, cultural evolution is smarter than we are, and our species evolved genetically in a world full of cultural stuff, ranging from sophisticated technologies like snow houses to nuanced protocols like using ash to chemically release key nutrients from corn that people had to just put their faith in. Relatively early in our species' lineage, surviving by one's wits alone without leaning on any cultural know-how from prior generations meant getting out-competed by better cultural learners who put their efforts into focusing selectively on what and from whom to learn. However, even if you can figure out what to learn and from whom, it doesn't mean that those who possess the most valuable cultural know-how will be motivated to permit you to hang around them and freely tap their accumulated wisdom. It's this evolutionary challenge that gave us prestige.